Hey everyone, how you doing today? My name's Kirsty, aka Beth Bookish, and on today's Bookmas video, I will be talking you through the 2024 releases that I read and ranking them. This year I didn't read as many books like released in the year as I did. I think 2023 I read 20 something books that were released in 2023. This year it's a much smaller number. I've only actually read 12 books that were released in this year, and I've definitely hauled more than that. So it wasn't my best year for reading those books, and of those, 2 were DNFs. So, you know, I actually only read 10 books. But those are still 10 books that I can rank for you and discuss. I will mention the DNFs. The first of these, oh no, one was a DNF, I apologise. But weirdly, even though I DNF'd a book, it is not the lowest rated. So as I said, we're going to go from worst to best, and the worst book that was a 2024 release for me this year that I read was The White and Blue Between Us. This was a boys love manga, and unfortunately, as with, I've explained this multiple times and I have mentioned this before, many boys love manga are written with a kind of fetish intent. And so the plot isn't necessarily the big thing. The big thing is about getting to the smut. There is also a big issue with consent within the boys love genre, specifically when it's been written by women, because again, it falls into that whole, this is the perception for some reason that these authors have of gay love, and so there is a lot of issues with consensual stuff in there, and this one fell prey to that. So I was like, it literally went from one page they were talking, the next page they were, and one of them was saying no, 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 and it was like, okay, this is not comfortable. So this was a 2-star. I think, I don't remember if Ren read it, but I know Chelsea also read it, and we both had the exact same feelings about this book, which was that it really should not have been approved for publishing in the first place. And there were glaring issues with plot, with the pacing, the characters, and the non-consensual issues. It should not have been a book that was approved, in my opinion. So yeah, that was my worst. Then we have the DNF, which was Sub-Zero Volume 1. The art in this, I will not lie, is absolutely stunning. If I had finished it, it would have gotten 10 out of 10 for artwork. Unfortunately, I got halfway through the volume, and this is like a 400-page graphic novel, and honestly I got halfway through this and I was like, I'm 200 pages in and I still don't understand what is going on in this story, why everything is the way it is, and who, like, anything about these characters, and I just lost complete interest. And unfortunately it was one, the art just wasn't enough to sustain it. It needed substance. My feelings towards this are, as the title said, Sub-Zero. But then all the rest of these books I did finish. And I will say, I've just had a quick look at the list, and I will say all of these, I think, were 4 and 5 stars. So it's been a good year. Apart from those 2, the rest of these were all 4 and 5 stars. In 10th place, but in no least the bottom, we have Monster Crush. In Monster Crush, we follow 2 young girls, one of which is actually a monster. She can transform. She's kind of, they're not fully werewolves, but they're also not fully human. They're kind of like a hybrid. They're definitely a lupine species. And as the family is being hunted by scientists to be used for science experiments, they have had to escape into the human world and disguise themselves and hide in the human world in order to be able to evade these scientists and evade capture. One of the daughters ends up falling for a human girl, and we follow their adventure as they fall in love. And then ultimately, you know, the conflict with the scientists come to light and all of this. I thought this was really well written. I did have a couple of issues where I felt it was a little bit insta-lovey, and we only actually saw the girls on page together for about 3 or 4 pages before they were kind of confessing feelings, and I was like, I would have liked a little bit more build up with them before it got to that. But it's one of the things that's made me realise I'm not such a big fan of standalone graphic novels. They generally tend to not be developed enough, and this one was definitely that. It had great characters, it had great atmosphere, but I just felt it was very, very rushed, very insta-lovey, and the romance itself was actually my least favourite part of it. I cared way more about the story of the family escaping these scientists and the scientists' side of things. So this one did get 3.5, but it was still a great time and I do still recommend it. It just maybe wasn't one that is for me, or I would need way more volumes and I would have preferred it to be over like a 2 or 3 book series to really flesh it all out. But it was still a fun time and like I said, I do still recommend it. Then in 9th place we have Suzume Volume 1. This is a manga version of the movie Suzume, where it's basically these portals have appeared and monsters are coming out of them to cause chaos and destruction. And then we've got the main character who sees one of these portals open, sees a guy a bit older than her sealing the door shut. She ends up embroiled with him and something happens and he ends up being turned into a chair. And so now she's got to try and help him to seal the gates while he's in this chair form. And it is hilarious, but it was also very tender and sweet in moments. I definitely want to check out the movie because I think it was so great and it's definitely one that I would want to continue. And it is giving me kind of Spirited Away-esque vibes with the style of the art and the story. So I feel like I'm going to have a great time. It's going to be very whimsy and it's going to give that kind of Ghibli-esque feel. I don't think it is an actual Ghibli movie, but it does still seem amazing and I did have a fun time with it and it was laugh out loud funny at times and I gave that 4 stars. Then in 8th place we have The Holiday Escape by Heidi Swain. This was the only book I read throughout July, but it got 4.5 stars and I had a fantastic time with it. This follows a holiday cottage and our main character is growing up on this cottage, kind of has very negative feelings towards it. She doesn't want to be there. She doesn't like the fact that it's got all the memories of her mother attached to it. She has always kind of felt like it's not the dream that her parents have tried to convince her it is. She's never really felt attached to it and she basically has this thing where she goes on holidays to escape from her reality, and when she's on these holidays she turns herself into somebody else. She'll be like, oh, I'm Florence, who is an art gallery director. I'm now Amelia, who is this big power businesswoman from the city, and she'll like dress accordingly and act accordingly. And it's just a way that she can play out the fantasy of the life she always wanted to have and would have had if her mum hadn't have died. Whereas now she's kind of stuck in this place that she hates, helping her dad because he can't deal on his own and he doesn't really want to get extra help in, and she's also reluctant as well. So she goes on one of these holidays, she meets this guy, she does her thing, they fall for each other, she realizes she's falling very hard very fast, gets scared, runs off, doesn't get in touch with him, and returns back to her home life where she doesn't feel fulfilled because the holiday didn't do what it normally does to help rejuvenate her. Enter a few weeks later and her dad has said that the small little sort of annex that they've built has been rented out for the entire summer by this guy. He turns up and it is the guy from her holiday, because of course it is. And so insert, you know, revelations and him finding out who she really is and her discovering a bunch of stuff about him. It ends up with the two of them teaming up to go around the area and rediscovering the places that she used to love to go to with her mum. It reignites her love for the area and in turn she decides maybe this is the life she wants after all, while also falling in love. And I really loved it, and I love with Heidi Swain the way she writes communities, because I've read The Winter Garden and now this, and both were just so beautifully interwoven with the community aspect. It was so good. I really did love it. But even though I loved it, there were ones that I loved even more, and I am gonna go straight on to number 7, which is Not in the Plan by Dana Hawkins. This was a queer adult debut. It's a romance between an author and a coffee shop owner. The coffee shop is struggling, only she hasn't admitted it to anyone, and she's just trying to keep things going as best she can until the inevitable happens and she loses everything. Then we have our author who wrote a bestseller, then has been contracted for a second book but is really, really struggling. She comes back home to be with her parents for a little while, needing a break, ends up at this coffee shop and is immediately drawn to the owner of the coffee shop, decides to use her as the inspiration for her next novel, doesn't expect to then fall in love with her, and feelings ensue. It was a little bit on the not fantastically written romantic side. Like, it's not a very spicy book in any way, shape or form, which doesn't bother me at all. But what did bother me was that at times the romance felt a bit lackluster and felt a little bit almost rushed. So while it was a great story and I loved the concept and I loved how eventually it came out that the writer was using this inspiration and the two had that discussion and things, and there were issues on both sides. I gave it 4 stars, I think, or 4.5, and I did really love it, and it was a great story. I just felt I wanted a bit more from the romance, but the author has now released 2 more books, and I have the next one in the series, so I am looking forward to reading that one. But I also really loved the backdrop of Seattle and the way it was described and the events that went on within the city while we were following their story, and that was really great and really well written. So it was another author who writes very well with the atmosphere, and the plot was really good with this one. I just felt the actual characters and the romance could have just done with a little bit more tweaking, but it was still a fantastic read. It was my first sapphic read of the year and I had a great time with it, and like I said, I did give it 4 stars. In 6th place, we have My Love in Stitches. This is a graphic novel in a monster society, and we follow Frankie, who is like a Frankenstein, and Momo, who is like a sort of blob monster thing, and they fall in love. And the problem that they have is that each of their respective best friends were once in a relationship and are like, oh no, if that person is friends with my ex, then clearly they are also a bad person, you shouldn't be together, and enter a bunch of chaos. It was a sweet, cute, fluffy romance. You don't feel like you needed it explaining. Everything was self-explained. It had a good plot, but I will say the majority of the actual plot stuff came in at the end and sets it up for when the next volume will be. And even though it was cute, it was ultimately one that I'm not really going to think about much. It might be one that in the future I'll see volume 2 is out and be like, oh, maybe I'll pick that up. But right this minute, I'm not sort of desperate to get to volume 2. But yeah, it was fun. It was cute. It had a couple of snigger-worthy moments. And I did really like the artwork. So that one did get 3.5 or 4 star. I will put it up here. I can't remember exactly what rating I gave it. In 5th place, we have The Dark Becomes Her by GDI Lin. This one was featured in my favourite covers of the year because I just love the cover of this book, and honestly it kind of lived up to the cover. It had some great moments. We've got a sister pairing. One of them ends up being possessed by a sort of demon spirit, while the other one is trying to figure out what's going on with her sister and break it, but is also under the pressure of having parents who expect and demand a lot from her, and who also disapprove of her wanting to study music when they think she should be doing other things. And it was a very interesting dynamic to see how sort of Chinese and Taiwanese mythology interwove with the Vancouver, I think it was Vancouver, I'm sure it was Vancouver, setting, and seeing how Asian tradition and Western modern traditions combine. And it had that kind of teenage conflict with the parents, but on a fantasy backdrop, and I enjoyed that a lot. I really liked the romance in this. I thought the pair worked really well, and I felt it was quite a natural progression. It didn't feel rushed, and even once they did start to get into that romance, it didn't take over the plot. And I really loved all of the different elements woven in. It was a new look at mythology for me, and I learned new mythologies through this and new sayings and meanings. And yeah, it was just great, especially when she starts to understand that she's always seen ghosts and spirits, and now she's understanding that there's this whole other world of people who fight spirits and who are responsible for protecting others from this sort of almost cult who entrap humans by selling them to demons and stuff. And it was just so well done. I did have a great time. I felt the atmosphere was a bit too tame. It started to go into like creepy horror gothic, but it then kind of pulled back. And I do kind of wish she'd really gone all in on that, because it would have been even more amazing. But I did give this one, I think it was either a 4 or a 4.5. Again, I'll write it here. And there is going to be another book, at least one other book, and I am very excited for when that comes out. In fourth place, we have Ghost Roast. This follows a family in New Orleans where the teenage daughter has grown up with a dad who is a ghost hunter. As a kid, she was really into it. As she's gotten older, she's like, oh God, this is really embarrassing. Why are we doing this? Ghosts aren't real. Only she then, after an incident with her friends where they all got arrested, as punishment, she has to spend the summer working with her dad. They go onto this old estate that used to be a plantation, and she realizes not only are ghosts real, but she can see them and interact with them. So while her dad is trying to get rid of these ghosts and is using scientific technology to do so, she can actually see the ghosts and is aware that actually they are friendly, they're not trying to hurt anyone, and that one of them in particular, who is a very cute boy, is intertwined with the family, and his name has been stricken from all the family records, and she's now trying to find out what happened to him, discover the true history of the estate, and also she discovers that there is in fact an evil spirit on the estate, and so she's now trying to find out who it is and get rid of it without her father getting rid of the good ghosts in the process. It was a great story. I loved how it brought to light the history of sort of Louisiana with plantations and how some people are lost to that history, especially when it's things like, you know, the masters of the estate interacting in non-consensual ways with their slaves, and the children that came of that basically have no inheritance, no title, yet they have the blood. It really did focus on those elements really well. I did again feel like the romance was my least favourite part of it. I just did not care about it. Again, this was a standalone, so I think it was just like, because it is a standalone, everything kind of had to be rushed a little bit. But again, it was one I could have happily read an entire series of this, and I felt the story resolved really well and the ending was really solid. And again, it had some really laugh out loud moments and it was a great time. Coming up into third place, we have another queer debut novel, and that was The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. I did a cottagecore vlog not long back where I read this book while going out, and I went for a walk with all the flowers and nature and all of that. But this was a cozy sapphic fantasy where I had a couple of issues with things like it being a bit too predictable and the romance wasn't incredible, but the actual writing was so beautiful. It was very lyrical, it was very picturesque. I felt really absorbed into the atmosphere of everything that was going on. And I loved the magic system again in this, where the magic is linked to things like the honey that's produced by the bees, and it has different medicinal properties depending on what type of honey you use. And we've basically got our main character. I keep forgetting names, so I'm really bad at this. We have our main character whose grandmother is the honey witch for this isle, Innisfree, and she's always known that there's something different about her. She does not fit into the high society that her family is in, and so eventually she manages to persuade, aka run away from her mother, and go with her grandma back to the island to become the next honey witch. And we follow her journey as she learns how to become the honey witch, how to heal people, how to help. But there is also a threat of the ash witch, who is the opposite of the honey witch, and there is a curse that has been placed on the honey witch that she is not able to fall in love. Enter the love interest, who starts to, you know, make her kind of regret her decisions a little bit, because she's like, I want to now fall in love with this person, but family secrets are unraveled and things kind of go crazy and kind of go chaos at the end, and there is a looming threat. So I did like the fact that even though it was a cozy fantasy, there was this threat, but it definitely did give me the cozy, wholesome vibes that I was looking for. And I did have an overall great time with it. And like I said, my favorite thing with this was the writing and how well written it was and how lyrical it was. And I'm realizing maybe I do like lyrical writing as long as it's done in a good way. But it was just so good, and I really loved like the magic and everything that was built up in that world. Hi! Neither of us expected Editing Kirsty to pop up. You might have, but I didn't expect me to pop up. Slight error that someone pointed out for me last night. when I was talking about the list and I was like, oh, my top 3, Ren was like, what about Covenant? And I was like, that wasn't 2024. And they were like, well, it was for me. And I was like, she. So I checked, and Covenant by Lysandra Wong is in fact 2024. When I looked at my list, I was like, where would I put this? And I didn't want to shuffle around any numbers or disrupt anything, so I've just decided that in joint 3rd place for the year is Covenant by Lysandra Wong. This is queer. It is a webcomic that has been published into a volume. There's now 3, 2 are out, 1 comes out sort of March next year, I believe. I don't know why I didn't put that on my most anticipated either. I'm doing great with this series for some reason. This is basically, as Lysandra themselves has said, it basically takes everything they hate about the church system and all of the hypocrisy and guilt and stuff and just makes it queer. It follows these, I can't remember, I don't think they're like priests, they're like almost acolytes of a church who hunt demons, and then one of them discovers that a new guy at his university is like being hunted by demons, and so they have to protect this guy, not knowing that he is in fact a lot more dangerous than they believe, and a connection starts to form between the two of them. But there are so many cool things. The way that the weapons are in this is so cool because they have like tattoos and the weapons come from the tattoos. Samson was the only character whose name I can remember, but that's for a reason. Best character by far. And yeah, it was really, really well written and I had a fantastic time. So if you like sort of queer, churchy, religious things where you fight demons, you're gonna want to read this. In 2nd place, we have a sequel and a finishing book of a duology by one of my favourite authors, and this is Celestial Monsters by Aidan Thomas. This is book 2 in the Sunbearer Trials duology, and I had the best time. I gave it 4.5 stars. It didn't quite hit the 5-star mark because I felt some of the things that I loved in the first book were missing, and it was the fact that the group had been separated. And I really loved the dynamics of the group as a whole in the first book. So when it came to the second book, I enjoyed everything. It was just, I wish there'd been a little bit more time with them all together again. I can't really say much about it because it was a sequel, but Naya is like my spirit animal and I will die on the hill that she is the best character in the series. I love how just unabashedly chaotic she is. She has ADHD. She is just, you know, ADHD personified, and I'm always here for that. I felt a lot of myself reflected in her. I love the friendship between her and Teo. And then when like Aurelio joins the group and he slightly disrupts the dynamic, but the way that the dynamic then shifts and changes, and like the unexpectedly amazing friendship that then blooms between him and Naya. I just loved all of it. Everything was so well done. The plot was really well written. I loved the gender expression again, where this is such a gender normative world. And we follow one of the characters in particular who in the first book was questioning some things about themselves. And then in this book puts it into action. And even when everyone around them hates them, they still immediately just switch to accommodate the new pronouns. And it was just so well written and I had a great time. I laughed a lot. It just, every time I pick up an Aidan Thomas book, I know I'm gonna have a great time, and I know the character dynamics and the friendship dynamics are gonna just make me laugh every single time. And as always, I cried. There was a scene in particular. I didn't full on ugly cry, but I definitely teared up, and I did have to pause for a moment just to wipe away the fact that I couldn't read anymore. It was definitely my second favourite book of the year and one of my favourite series that I finished for the year. And then in first place, my favourite 2024 release that I read in this year is a surprising one, and it's also the only one I have a physical copy of because I bought it while I was in Australia, and that is Sorcery and Small Magics by Mai Gadusi. I'm loving books with musical elements because this has sort of like spell songs. And the main character, Leo, he is the only one he's ever known that can do it. He can put magic to music, and it's so beautifully written. I loved the atmosphere in here. The relationship in here is incredible. You've got this, it's kind of set in a magical school called the Font, where you have sorcerers and scrivers. Scrivers write the magic, sorcerers cast it. Most sorcerers can't write magic and most scribers can't cast it, or if they do, it comes at a very high cost. And it's a really interesting dynamic, and you've basically got Leo, who is a scriber, and Sebastian Grimm, who is a caster. The two of them have had a very uneasy relationship throughout the entirety of their time at this school, to the point that they are kept separate until their final year, where one of their instructors puts them together, basically being like, well, you've got to learn to get along with and you've got to work with whoever you get put up with in the future. Surely you two are now in your 20s, you're mature enough, you can work together. And they're kind of like, absolutely not, we hate each other. And then it's made even worse when, because Grimm can cast spells without saying them out loud, Leo accidentally knocks into another sorcerer at one point and ends up with a spell in his arsenal that he should not have. And it's a spell that was actually confiscated and was made illegal, and it was due to be destroyed. It ends up in his possession, Sebastian Grimm casts it on him, and he is now bound to the guy that he hates more than anybody else. And he now has to do anything that Sebastian Grimm tells him. The pair of them are then forced to work together to try and get rid of this curse, which leads them into this big, deep, dark, scary forest that is beyond the realm of the magic that they use and has all these big, scary monsters in, because the only sorcerer that will be able to help them lives in this forest. It is a very slow burn. It is like, if you are after spicy books, this is not going to be it for you. By the end of the book, we have one kissing scene, but it's amazing. I loved it. It was so well done. But I loved the snark and the sarcasm between the two of them. I also love how we get hidden depths with each character. And as the book goes on and we learn more about them, I just found myself loving both of them more and more and more. And I just loved all of the characters in here. I loved the way that the spells were written. I loved all the different animals and the creatures and the way the magic worked. And I've seen that this was written, like someone mentioned this is a cozy fantasy. I personally wouldn't call this a cozy fantasy. I'd say it's a light fantasy because of the fact that it has got magic and stuff, but I wouldn't say it's really cozy because there is constant conflict. It just doesn't give that kind of wholesome, cute warmth that most cozy fantasies do. And they do go on an actual quest and it has an actual set storyline. And I feel it's like one of those things where, as Ren said, people have taken hold of a concept and now everything is branched under that concept and the original idea behind it is gone, because this definitely to me is not cozy fantasy. This is just fantasy. I wouldn't even say it's a romantasy either, because even though, yes, there's a romance, it's a slow burn. So, you know, there is going to be a sequel. I'm already super excited. And I literally picked this up as, I think Ren saw it, picked it up and was looking at it, and then they turned it around. They were like, oh, it's queer. And I went, yoink, and I grabbed it and bought it for them. And then I was like, well, I now want to read it. And it's ended up 5 stars and I absolutely loved it. And as I said in this video, it is my favourite 2024 release that I read in 2024. So win-win. So that is my rundown of the books that released this year that I read. Let me know in the comments, are there any 2024 releases that you have enjoyed or even really not enjoyed? Let me know what your favourites are, or if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are. In the meantime, I hope you're all good. I hope you're staying safe. Don't forget to check out my Patreon, which is always linked below, as well as my Etsy, which will be returning in a couple of months when I'm back in England. And I will see you guys on the next video. Bye!